Okay, guys, so I haven't been filming a lot recently because I've been seriously lacking motivation. Because I've been a little bit abnormally depressed, just like overly depressed recently. Which kind of leads me into what I want to talk about in this video, which is just basic things that I think everyone should know about mental disorders or mental illness. And we don't talk about it enough in this society, and it's becoming a very big issue. Or like we are realizing that it's an issue, and we need to be talking about this, and there needs to be a dialogue. I'm not really gonna go into like my specific disorders. I do have multiple. Basically, the way I'd first describe them is yes, you can have multiple mental disorders. That is a thing. You can. And the way I'd like to make an analogy between the spectrum of which someone can fall for a mental disorder, like whether you are more extreme, I guess. Like, for instance, psychopaths or something like that, or like depression even. Some people are more depressed or less depressed. Like, it'll affect them more or less, and it depends on the person. It varies person to person how the disease or disorder is going to affect you. And if you do have multiple disorders like I do, each disorder is not going to be on the same side of the spectrum as the other, so not necessarily. Like, for anxiety, I'm higher on the anxiety spectrum than I am the depression spectrum. My anxiety affects me worse than my depression does. Probably because I'm properly medicated for my depression, but that's neither here nor there. Also remembering that while many people do have mental disorders, and while I do, it's not something that consumes your life. It doesn't define you. Like, yes, that is a part of me, but I'm not gonna let it define me, you know? I'm not my mental disorders, and my mental disorders are not me. Does that make sense? Probably. I feel like there was a lot more I had to say about it. It's just, don't feel pity for us. Like, we don't want to talk about it because we don't want people to feel bad for us. We don't want to reach out because we don't want to bother people. That's at least on the depression side. And there's so many different mental disorders, and people just need to be talking about it. It's also like normies. I find myself hanging out with a lot of people that also have mental disorders. So when I hang out with people that don't, I forget that. No offense, normies, but you guys are a little bit sensitive. My friends and I make awful, like, dry jokes about our mental disorders and, like, the stuff that we've been through in our lives, all of the traumatic events and all the trauma. We just make jokes about it because that's how we cope. That's a coping mechanism for us. Music is a huge coping mechanism. Like, it's just different ways. Like, when people are using drugs, there's gonna be a reason. People don't just do drugs for shits and giggles, you know? I mean, sometimes, but people that do hard drugs especially, there's a reason. They're trying to escape something. That's an escape. So, and then also with alcoholism, like, that's a mental disease. That's almost, it can be genetic. Like, that does run in the family. I am an addict. I have an addiction to nicotine. You know, like, that's a very common one in this generation and in most generations, except now we have vaping. So it's almost worse now. It's not a cigarette problem anymore, it's nicotine in general. And, like, that's an issue too. Like, all these different types of addictions, like, that's also a mental illness or mental disease that no one's talking about. Phone dependency, caffeine dependency, like, all of these things, like, just being aware of it and learning how to cope with it. And for normies, all you guys need to do is be supportive and try and be understanding. And if someone's telling you something, if you start to see signs, it's not just people that have mental disorders. It's people that don't, that also need to be learning about this. Because without the support systems, we would be nothing. And I would have killed myself by now. Let's just be real. See, like that, like, I just laughed to cope with what I just said. But you know what I'm saying? It's like different things, and it's easy for me to spot other people with mental disorders, but I feel like, you know, the outcasts of society, or the people, like the goth people, or whatever you want to say, however you want to label us, some people that are fairly antisocial, we wear a lot of black, like, we got a lot going on, you know, in our heads. And it's hard for us to talk to other people because we get really insecure and we get into our heads. And again, that's really just focusing on depression, but that's 20% of this population has clinical depression, which is not to say that it's the worst or the lowest, you know, because statistics like that don't take into account the spectrum. Don't take into account how other mental disorders also can affect, like, I'm bipolar, and I have depression and anxiety and a couple others. So my depression will affect the bipolar side of me. Another way around. So it really just depends person to person again. And the support system is huge. It's like having people to talk to and understanding that you're not alone. You're not. There's like always going to be a support group. Your friends, like a trusted, someone you trust. Talk to someone. Like, if something feels like it's going wrong in your head, if something doesn't feel right, if something feels off, talk to someone. That's the best thing you can do. But if I think of anything else, or if you guys have any questions, or anything else you want me to talk about, just let me know. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye.